There's a cruel irony in the fact that one of the greatest composers ever to write for the human voice died of throat cancer. Giacomo Puccini died in 1924, and the supremacy of Italian opera died with him. But let's go back. Puccini's career had an amazing trajectory, and with the success of his operas, especially La Bohème, Tosca, and Madame Butterfly, he became a multimillionaire, spending his money famously on elegant clothes, houses, and fast cars. But apart from this colorful biography, there's the music. It is some of the most ravishing, intimate, passionate, sometimes even erotic and clever music ever heard in the theater and beyond. Opera in the late 19th century had been dominated by one man, Giuseppe Verdi. His works overall had come to define what opera was all about. Theatrical excitement married with rousing, noble, grand delivery. A powerful symbol of the Italian identity. The nation was desperate for a worthy successor. That role fell to Giacomo Puccini, a modern man in every way. In fact, he was one of the first composers to be captured on film, as this rare footage shows. Here was a composer who was to take opera into the 20th century, who looked beyond Italy for his ideas, and his music became incredibly popular. Sitting in the theater, you become personally involved with his characters. The emotions at once tender, poetic, flirtatious, despairing, and violent. By looking at 5 of his great operas, I want to show you that Puccini, through a mastery of melody and orchestral color, portrayed tragedy, comedy, and love, desperate, impossible love. We begin in the garrets and cafes of Paris with what is probably Puccini's most famous opera. No other opera expresses the irrepressible energy of youth than Puccini's La Bohème. Drawing on his experience as a young student in Milan, it creates a story about 4 young students living on the edge, a musician, a poet, a philosopher, a painter. There's a story that Puccini, as a young student, shared a herring, one single herring between 4 guys, and this finds its way into the opera. Puccini throws you into a fleeting world of youth that everybody can relate to. And this is the secret of the success of this opera. As a penniless 22-year-old student in 1880, Puccini came to study here in cosmopolitan Milan, the most sophisticated, forward-looking city in Italy. Milan made a huge impact on the young Puccini, newly arrived from his provincial hometown of Lucca in Tuscany. Here, the latest ideas jostled with the latest fashions. In a letter to his mother, Puccini wrote, "How beautiful Milan is, and what youthfulness." Puccini based La Bohème on a book by Henri Murger, Scenes from a Bohemian Life. In it, he found the cafes and street markets that he recognized from his own student days in Milan, and it captured his imagination.
There isn't a bar too much. The text is wonderful. It's vividly written. Everything he wants to say is in the music. And that is the wonderful thing about this opera. It's those four boys living together. And a lot of us have been students and we've shared apartments with other students. And in Bohème, they're all people that we can understand and associate with.
The musical roots of La Bohème are to be found here at the Conservatorio di Musica di Milano, where the young Puccini came to study. Although his family was penniless, his mother petitioned Queen Margherita, and the young Giacomo won a scholarship that opened the doors to the most prestigious music school in Italy. This is a bust of the young Puccini during his conservatory days. Handsome he is too. Reports say that he was easygoing but shy and certainly no model student. Inattentive, restless, and prone to writing letters in class rather than studying. He wrote to his mother, "I'm in dramatic literature class and I'm bored to tears." But at the time, it wasn't drama that captured everyone's imagination. Symphonic music from Northern Europe was becoming the rage. The Conservatoire Library houses the handwritten scores of the most important works Puccini wrote as a student, the Capriccio Sinfonico and the Preludio Sinfonico. Now, the key word is sinfonico. There are no singers to be found in these pieces. But the feeling for melody is extremely strong. The ending of the Preludio Sinfonico certainly leaves a debt to Mr. Wagner, whose music Puccini would have come across, as it sounds uncannily like the ending for the Flying Dutchman. Now, in the Capriccio Sinfonico, which begins with a quite bombastic and solemn, almost march, I would say, has a little surprise in its second movement, because here I'm astounded here to be looking at actually what is the music that became the beginning of La Bohème. This figure is jumping out at me here, and it's taken verbatim. It's just incredible to see this just note for note as the beginning of one of the most important operas in the repertoire. Puccini was 25 when he left the Conservatorio, and the Capriccio Sinfonico was his graduation work for which he received a distinction. After the first performance, one newspaper critic predicted that he had a future as a great symphonist. But Puccini had other ideas. A major revolution in opera was underway. Puccini and his fellow students, such as the young composer Pietro Mascagni, were looking abroad for inspiration. From Northern Europe came the operas of Richard Wagner, whose vision was for a total theatrical experience, one that highlighted other art forms such as design and stagecraft, while the music was written in one seamless whole. Attractive musical ideas were coming from France also, what with the grand ambitions and enormous spectacles of Meyerbeer. And of course, the phenomenon that was Bizet's Carmen. Gone were the princes and palaces of Verdi. Now you had murderers, gun runners, bullfighters, earthy, common people. Not as archetypes of good and evil, but real people with real problems. People you might even meet in the street. Romanticism was out, and realism was in. The Italians followed suit. In 1880, the author Giovanni Verga published a short story, Cavalleria Rusticana, Rustic Chivalry. A simple tale of passion, jealousy and revenge set in a Sicilian village. This work became the beacon for what is known in Italy as verismo, realism.
Compare, fate come più vi piace.
It was Puccini's one-time flatmate Pietro Mascagni who in 1888 set Cavalleria Rusticana as an opera. Here was something raw and immediate, and importantly, something the Italians could call their own. Stories about everyday life.
It was in the air. Melodies became melodic at the point of exploding. There were blood transfusion stage. I mean, if there was not the hurting, the flesh hurting the heart, it was not a masterpiece. It's not only the violence of a relationship, it's the violence of feelings. I mean, Bohème is not certainly a violent story.
No.
It's a beautiful little...
Is Bohème a verismo opera?
Well, yes.
In Bohème, Puccini replaced the violence of knives and bloodletting with a modest but intensely tragic love story. At the heart of La Bohème are Rodolfo and Mimi. In this scene, the two meet for the first time.
All of the arias in Bohème, they don't have an introduction. If you go back to the middle period of Verdi, all of those operas, they all have introductions to arias, which the stage director has to stage. You have to have an idea about it. But the arias happen as in natural speech. There isn't a bit of music before Che gelida manina. It happens.
One of Puccini's great strengths is the absolute economy of his writing. There's nothing melodramatic here. The orchestral accompaniment is so subtle, the text so naturally set, that Puccini really shows us what falling in love is like.
They're terribly poor, but love takes over. And I think Puccini was into love, you see. I think he understood about love.
But our young student's happiness was to be short-lived. Mimi is dying of tuberculosis. The simplicity of their first meeting is echoed perfectly in Mimi's tragic demise. One of the great Puccini interpreters is the soprano Renata Scotto. She has not only sung the role of Mimi, but almost every one of Puccini's heroines in the world's major opera houses. Her recordings are a benchmark for performers and listeners alike. Perhaps one of the most poignant parts of La Bohème is Mimi's death. We know it's coming. We know it's coming maybe even from the very beginning.
It's the most beautiful, the most emotional moment in any Puccini's opera, I think. It's the most beautiful ending because it doesn't end loud. It doesn't end, you know, melodramatic. and like she disappears, she goes. And the words are fantastic. I cry all the time when I hear this ending.
For me, the silence before her actual death.
Qui amor, sempre con te, le mani al caldo e dormire.
That gets me every time, that one. She's gone.
Gone, but in the silence with that chord. Nobody's moving, nobody does anything. I think this is pure theater that gets the audience. You cannot keep your eyes dry. You can't. You have to cry.
Puccini premiered La Bohème in 1896 to mixed reviews. One critic wrote, "Just as it left no impression on the minds of the listeners, La Bohème will not leave much of a mark on the history of our lyric theatre." How wrong can you be? Today, La Bohème is one of the most famous and frequently performed operas in the whole repertoire. To find out where Puccini's prodigious musical talent was first nurtured, I've come to his hometown of Lucca, in northern Tuscany. During the Middle Ages, this city was known as the most serene republic of Lucca. It was famous for its silks and its textiles, but for centuries it also boasted a strong tradition of sacred music. This tradition was kept alive from the mid-18th century by the overwhelming presence of one family, 5 generations of the Puccinis. Puccini's father was director of the city's music institute and led the musical life of Lucca. Puccini was only 5 years old when his father died, and his funeral oration made it clear what was expected of young Giacomo. The city should and must turn the post of organist and maestro di cappella to Signor Giacomo as soon as he is able to discharge his duties. The poor boy had his future mapped out for him. Puccini embarked on a rigorous musical education and showed signs of real flair on the keyboard and at composition. But on reaching his teens, he became the family's main breadwinner, earning money by playing for church services. This is the church of San Pietro Somaldi, where Puccini's father and great-grandfather before him played the organ. All the signs pointed to Puccini carrying on the family tradition. But then one event was to change the course of Puccini's life forever. One evening, he and a group of friends walked from Lucca to Pisa, about 20 miles away, to see a performance of Giuseppe Verdi's opera, Aida. It was a theatrical event that just blew him away. In fact, later, Puccini was to state that it was as if a window, a new musical window, had been opened to him. But it was not just the music, it was the sense of place. Aida's Egyptian setting is part of its very identity, and this was to be true of all Puccini's operas as well. Perhaps the best example, his next, Tosca. This shocking thriller includes torture, attempted rape, assassination, execution, and suicide. And it is set right here in the heart of Italy, in the heart of Rome. Tosca is an intense tale of lust and political manipulation, set in a Rome under the oppressive regime of the head of the secret police, Baron Scarpia.
Tosca. E Scarpia che sciogliano il fuoco della tua gelosia.
Tosca is Puccini's bloodletting opera. The music is both dramatic and powerful and tightly wound around the action. The opera is set over the course of one momentous day in Italian history, the 14th of June, 1800, the day Napoleon invaded, and this is the backdrop for the unfolding drama. Here, time and place are as important as the characters, and Tosca is set in iconic locations around the city. This is the Palazzo Farnese, one of the most imposing palaces of the 16th century, and now the French embassy in Rome. The whole of the second act of Tosca is set in one of its rooms. Astonishing. I've conducted Tosca so many times, but to actually be in the room where the heart of the opera takes place is for me it's an amazing moment, actually. The walls are covered by these stunning Florentine frescoes celebrating the Farnese family's fidelity towards the church. How ironic it is that this be where Baron Scarpia conducts his business. It is here that he brings the liberal Bonapartist, Mario Cavaradossi, to be tortured.
Al violenza! Cavaliere, vi piaccia accomodarvi. O saper! Sedete! Aspetto! E sia!
I think this opera is a soundtrack of a movie. In fact, it was the beginning of the cinema in that period. And I think Puccini was in advance.
Non lo so! Negate d'avergli dato cibo! Nego! E vesti! Nego! E asilo nella villa che là sia nascosto! Nego! Nego!
In his mind, everything was with image. And the music was not just like a normal opera. It's 2 hours, and the sound with the action is perfect for movie.
The third side of this triangle is, of course, Tosca herself. A singer, a famous diva, fiery, a character driven by her pure love for the painter Mario Cavaradossi, a fervent religious conviction, and alas, political naivete.
Puccini wrote in such a way that everything you believe. It's a perfect dialogue between orchestra and text in Puccini all the time. And it's very powerful, and it's very heavy in a way. It's very symphonic and very well orchestrated.
Puccini's great skill is that he crafts the music to the action very precisely. If a mood needs to shift at pivotal moments in the drama, the music unerringly sets the scene. In blatant abuse of power, he places the entire weight of Cavaradossi's fate on her shoulders. Submit to Scarpia's lust, Cavaradossi lives. Out of this desperate situation emerges one of Puccini's greatest, most moving arias for soprano. With this sublime fusion of music and emotion, Puccini perfectly captures Tosca's inner turmoil. "I'm a good person," she sings. "How can God reward me with a dilemma such as this?" Now we have real melodrama. Tosca does agree to Scarpia's demands, but unable to go through with it, she murders him and flees here to the Castel Sant'Angelo, where Cavaradossi is imprisoned and where Act 3 of the opera takes place. Dawn is breaking, and far below me, most of Rome is still asleep. Just over my shoulder is the Sant'Andrea della Valle church, where Act 1 takes place, and hidden behind that is the Farnese Palace. So the distances are very, very short. You can imagine Tosca running here after she has murdered Scarpia. But it's not just the specific locations that conjure up Tosca's oppressive world. What Puccini does in this opera is to create a musical soundscape that vividly captures the atmosphere of the city. The dawn scene at the beginning of Act 3 is a remarkable piece of writing. Here Puccini takes the sound of bells, myriad bells, a unique and recognizable feature of Rome, and recreates it in the music. Underpinning a sighing melody from the strings are the bells of Rome, and no other composer had done anything quite like it before. This gives this music an air of authenticity, but it was considered quite unusual and strange. The actual sounds of the city superimposed onto music. What was this? And at the time it was quite controversial. But what a stunning effect, and what a new effect. But unfortunately, Puccini's innovations weren't to everyone's taste. One critic wrote, "If there is a God watching our poor country, Tosca will be an obscure and uncertain memory. A composition where there were the bells of various churches, everything was there, except music."
Mario, su presto, andiamo.
But for Puccini's heroines, tragedy is never far away. Cavaradossi is executed by Scarpia's soldiers, and for Tosca, there is only one way out.
It's very dramatic and very powerful. And I was thinking about the final scene. The final scene to have, that craziness. To think in 1 second, the only thing I can do is to disappear, to die.
Despite the critics' reservations, the public loved Tosca, which premiered in Rome in 1900 and Puccini had another hit on his hands. By now, Puccini's reputation and earnings were growing, and he was able to build himself a villa in the Tuscan countryside that he loved. Torre del Lago, on the shores of Lake Mazzuccoli, was to be his home for the next 20 years. Now it's where the Puccini Festival Foundation organizes the only festival in the world completely dedicated to the works of Giacomo Puccini. They also hold this rare archive of him. In Torre del Lago, Puccini could indulge in all his passions. He was an enthusiastic hunter. He also had a boundless appetite for speed and the latest motor cars. But above all, Torre del Lago was a haven from the demands of his increasing fame. He described it as supreme bliss, paradise, Eden, a refuge for the spirit. This is my first time here, and I have to tell you, it's a very, very special feeling. Puccini's living room. Of course, this is the piano upon which he composed most of his operas. He composed late at night, but actually with Puccini, often he was surrounded by his friends and he'd be playing cards, and an idea would come to him. He'd come over here, play a few notes, jot down his ideas, and return to the game. Though the house was certainly comfortable, domestic life for Puccini was never easy. He was living here with Elvira Gemignani, the wife of an old school friend, but it was a stormy relationship, beset with violence and jealous tirades. She had a fearsome temper, and it can't have helped that Puccini was frequently unfaithful, and that he boasted that he was a mighty hunter of game, opera librettos, and attractive women. But Puccini's next opera would tell of a very different kind of domesticity. Once again, there was a woman at its center. It was on a trip to see the London premiere of Tosca that Puccini's imagination was fired by a play he saw here at the Duke of York's Theatre. It was written by the American playwright David Belasco, and it was called Madame Butterfly. Here was a heart-rending story of a young Japanese girl who falls in love and whose dreams are shattered by an irresponsible American sailor.
I remember I did my first recording of Butterfly. It was in Rome, and the assistant conductor was Luigi Ricci. Luigi Ricci did Butterfly with Puccini. And he said, Puccini wants this, Puccini wants that. And Puccini wanted really the drama from the first entrance, because the drama begins with the entrance of Butterfly.
From the outset, we're placed in Butterfly's world. We first hear the voice of Cho-Cho-san, a 15-year-old geisha, off stage. This was a technique Puccini often used to heighten the feeling of expectation. She's on her way to an arranged marriage with the American sailor, Pinkerton, who has basically bought a child bride.
Butterfly, she's the only and real protagonist in Puccini's opera. She's the only one where everybody turns around her.
But she gives everything up. She gives up her religion.
Exactly.
She gets married in the Christian way.
Exactly. So this girl wait for a moment of life in her life. And she believes that this man is the great opportunity.
Puccini described Madame Butterfly as the most evocative and heartfelt opera he had conceived. The great tragedy here is that Pinkerton is driven by infatuation and desire, whereas for Butterfly, it's a total sacrifice. Madame Butterfly is a huge challenge for any performer. Recently, I recorded it in Rome with the Orchestra dell'Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia, where Angela Gheorghiu sang Butterfly and Jonas Kaufmann was Pinkerton.
I have the impression no tenor really likes to do this piece on stage because it's such a shame how he behaves. This whole thing is only a setup to play around with that innocent little girl. He's never honest. He's young, he's fresh, and he wants to have fun. And since he has money, he uses the money to have the best fun ever.
What Puccini does musically here is wonderful. It is their wedding night, and over the course of a ravishing duet, Pinkerton's feelings are completely transformed, and he becomes truly intoxicated.
Puccini, he's doing a wonderful job on the duet. You know, sometimes, even if you are a liar, you believe in your lie, you know, so much to make the girl in front of you to believe. But at the same time, I think Pinkerton, in that night, he really was in love.
I believe that the best love duet is in this opera. And there is a seduction moment from Butterfly. I think that Vogliatemi Bene, it's a seduction scene. Butterfly grows from the entrance. The music is for love, and Puccini is in love with love.
The poetry of this moment, it's like a flower that opens slowly, and you are there. It's as if you are wax in Puccini's hands, and you're melting, and you even as a singer are melting away by this wonderful music. Many other composers had emotions, they had beautiful phrasings, they had wonderful melodies, but to put that all together in one line and to make it sound very smooth and very easy, effortless, is, I think, something that Puccini was capable much more than many others.
The tragedy of this story begins to emerge when Pinkerton returns to the US, leaving Butterfly pregnant. 3 long years pass before he returns, but the ultimate horror for Butterfly is that he has come not to see her, but to take their child for his new American wife.
Here we have a story of a woman from the beginning to the end, with a life destroyed by not knowing the world, and the same story all over again. It's very modern.
Having given up her religion and family, Butterfly finally gives up her son. For her, death would be preferable than the return to life as a geisha. It's an unbearably traumatic tale, and Puccini doesn't shy away from it. With Madame Butterfly, Puccini believed he had written his best opera to date. But the Italian audience felt very differently. The premiere was a complete fiasco, with boos and farmyard noises filling the theatre from the moment the curtain went up. In Puccini's own words, it was a real lynching. One illuminating article, written in 1912 by a young and feisty Italian, Fausto Torrefranca, Puccini e l'Opera Internazionale, was a 130-page tirade that slammed Puccini and the world he represented as being, quote, not art, but artifice. For Torrefranca, Puccini's operas were weak, impotent, and feminine. His attack on Puccini fired the imagination of Italians who were yearning for the monumentality of Richard Wagner's music, grandiose marches, powerful instrumental music, a modern-day soundtrack for an industrial, virile, masculine Italy. The chance to test the nation's masculinity came, but in the most horrific manner. Italy entered the war in May 1915 with a large but ill-equipped and ill-trained army. By October, some 300,000 men had died. Puccini's stance was controversial, to say the least, even before Italy entered the war against Germany. One story describes how, during a visit by the great Italian conductor Toscanini, Puccini announced that it might be a good idea if Germany did invade Italy to inject some good German order. Needless to say, the patriot Toscanini was incensed. Puccini also refused to sign a petition to a French newspaper denouncing the German atrocities, claiming that he had friends on both sides. When Italy was drawn into the conflict, Puccini spent most of his time at home. These stories demonstrated just how politically naive he was. To the majority of Italians, his actions were unpatriotic, and he was vilified for them. But Puccini continued to work, and when the war had ended, he would produce something completely new, something that would restore his reputation with the Italian nation. Puccini's answer to the First World War was his only true comedy, which premiered in 1918. Gianni Schicchi is the story of a resourceful rogue who manipulates a greedy family out of their inheritance. Its themes are universal, and in this Royal Opera House production, we've set it in the 1950s.
Gianni Schicchi is a kind of everyman. He's someone that you can identify with in a kind of earthy manner. If you're a gardener, you like to get your hands dirty. If you're a car mechanic, you need you need to get grease on your hands, and he's that kind of a man. He's Mr. Fix-It.
In the first minute of the opera, the head of the Donati family, Buoso, dies. The Donatis are an old established Florentine family that have fallen on hard times and see Buoso's will as the solution to all their problems.
They're a kind of voracious family. You know, they've probably already been around the house with the coloured stickers saying, this picture is mine, that chair is mine.
Unfortunately, Buoso has left all his money to a monastery.
Ranuccio comes up with this idea, you know, I have it. We'll bring Gianni Schicchi into the house, and he can take care of all these problems.
Gianni Schicchi is set under the cloudless skies of Florence, home to the Italian Renaissance and one of the most beautiful cities in Italy. By choosing to place his opera here, Puccini not only taps into a deep sense of national pride, but it's as if he's saying, I do love my country, and I am a patriot. Not only this, but coming to the aid of the established order, the desperate Donatis, is Gianni Schicchi, the new man, a vibrant force to reinvigorate old Italy.
Very good. Aging rocker.
The characters are brilliantly drawn. They actually seem not to relate one to another, except when this avarice comes upon them. The way that Puccini represents all of that is just simply, it seems to me, absolutely perfect. He captures every little moment and every little character along the way with their own natures properly represented. Then there's nothing to query. You understand everyone at any time.
Schicchi's cunning plan is to persuade the family that he should impersonate the dead Buoso Donati and change the will in their favor. In this scene, Puccini's comic dexterity vividly describes the Donati family's avarice. This opera shows Puccini's extreme skill at ensemble writing, especially where he takes a musical device like a quartet, 4 people singing at once, and uses it to highlight their character. Puccini's very, very clever. Listen to this, where everybody's trying to fight their own corner. Here it's the rhythm, it's the words words like taccagna and sordida, spilorcia, gretta. It's music in itself.
Brava la vecchia, brava, per la dote sacrifichi mia figlia tuo nipote. Brava la vecchia, brava, vecchia attaccata,
I think that this, in the comic work of Puccini, is a real innovation, the tempo, the energy, linked to these characters fighting with each other. They're Italians, and they're explosive, and they want to kill each other, because throughout history, that's what these people always do. In the end, Gianni Schicchi, the new man of Italy, triumphs over the old order. By deceiving the Donatis, he ensures that their family fortune is left to him. To a nation emerging exhausted from World War I, the opera was seen as a statement of belief in a renewed Italy. It was applauded as a national masterpiece and went some way to restoring Puccini's reputation. Now in his 60s, Puccini was acknowledged as the grand old man of Italian opera. Yet he continued to feed his appetite for modern music, closely following radical developments by avant-garde composers such as Stravinsky and Schoenberg. This need to stay current and an exotic new libretto found an outlet in what was to be Puccini's last opera, Turandot, the story of an icy-hearted princess thawed by the flame of pure love and set in the China of legends. He throws down the gauntlet right away, creating what we expect, a Chinese musical environment. Here Puccini employed huge orchestral forces, his biggest yet, using a whole new palette of sounds, especially percussion, to set the scene and the mood of Turandot's China. Turandot's epic scale and huge choruses recall Verdi's Aida, the very work that had such an impact on Puccini as a young man. Turandot is based on a tale from the Persian epic 1001 Nights, and it's Puccini's most spectacular creation. You've created probably the most famous productions of Turandot that were ever done. The one at the Metropolitan Opera.
You conducted it? Yeah?
No, I never conducted it, but I was in the audience once for a dress rehearsal, and I just will never, ever forget it for its conjuring up of this world.
But he liked it, not because he was always been attracted by the Far East, Japan, China, all the Chinese music, but because in that moment the women were opening up to the new society, the commanding and very, very merciless attitude, feminist in a way.
Puccini started work on Turandot just a few years after the First World War, and it is a brutal tale. The Princess Turandot has set a grim challenge to any suitor: answer 3 riddles correctly, and she will give herself in marriage. Fail, and you will be executed. Ironically, the title role isn't really the heroine of this opera. The pure Puccini heroine is represented by a character that he invented, Liu, a slave girl. Prince Kalaf is Turandot's latest admirer, and he has vowed to win her. But Liu is in love with the prince, and it's her sacrifice that will resolve the opera.
Liu is absolutely the sister of all the other girls that die young.
But she's a creation of Puccini's and his librettist, I believe. I don't think she was in the original story.
Well, he must have had in mind really to create, at the end, the message, and the triumph of love, of humble love, faithful love.
Prince Calaf solves Turandot's riddles, but offers her release if she can find out his name. The only person who knows it is Liu, who refuses to give up her secret, so she is tortured and the crowd bay for her blood. The premiere of Turandot was planned for La Scala in Milan, conducted by the legendary Toscanini, but Puccini's health had begun to fail. He had been a heavy smoker all his life, and now he began to complain of a sore throat that wouldn't go away. It turned out to be throat cancer. The last aria that Puccini ever wrote is sung by Liu. Rather than divulge the prince's name, she chooses to kill herself, making the ultimate sacrifice. Puccini never saw Turandot performed. He died on the 29th of November 1924, the final scene still unfinished. At the premiere in front of a packed house, Toscanini put down his baton at the point where Puccini ceased writing, turned to the audience and said, "At this point, the maestro laid down his pen." Everyone left in silence. Puccini's death was cause for an enormous outpouring of national and international grief. The golden age of Italian opera had come to an end. But his music has retained its power to reach out way beyond the confines of the opera house. It was to be an aria from Turandot that was to prove the extraordinary power of Italian opera at the end of the 20th century. Nessun dorma. The legacy of Italian opera is extraordinary. Built on a foundation laid by Monteverdi and developed by a string of theatrical geniuses, it was aided and abetted by a language that glorified the voice. It's had unparalleled success in transmitting every type of human emotion through every type of character, prostitute to priest, via the recitativo, the bel canto aria, coloratura, and declamation. It has touched millions and continues to win the hearts of people all over the world. Viva l'opera in italiano!